afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Lee, Director for Sustainable Development Finance here at the Center for Global Development. Welcome to this discussion. It's about country platforms that perform, and it's a subject that I believe could have far-reaching implications for development progress. Let's not view this conversation as another discussion of donor coordination only. It goes far beyond that. To me, country platforms could offer an answer to a more fundamental development question. How can developing countries translate development finance and other forms of assistance, including assistance from external sources, into tangible gains that would not otherwise have happened? So it's really the additionality question. And additionality is usually framed as the responsibility of MDBs or DFIs or donors. But country platforms put recipient countries in the driver's seat. As we'll hear today, I'm sure, country ownership not only means power, it means accountability. Governments have to be clear and united about their priorities and their targets, which we know is a major challenge for any government at whatever income level. They have to be laser focused on efficient allocation of resources to achieve not just project success, but broader systemic or programmatic success. They have to have the capacity and credibility to design and manage a functional division of labor between public actors and private actors, internal actors and external actors. And all the while, they have to sustain political will and support for the goals of the platform. So that is a lot. But country platforms make these major demands on governance, and that could be a highly important and intended consequence, positive consequence of platforms. By raising the stakes for success and the ambition level, platforms could build stronger institutions, and that could have positive spillovers for the government as a whole and for the economy as a whole. So this, to me, is an effort to that not only is directed at a particular set of objectives, but could have far-reaching and long-term consequences for country governance and ownership. At the same time, this is emphatically not an enterprise where you can build the car while you're driving it. Much of the work must be front-loaded. I think we'll hear that today. The success or failure of country platforms depends heavily probably on how carefully it's constructed before it's ever launched. And it also depends on the degree to which external development partners, including the multilateral development banks, are willing to measure their success as part of a collective effort and not just as individual actors. And that really bears a lot of emphasis. Anyway, so that's my musings on country platforms. Let's turn to people who are actually much better qualified to speak on this issue. Today, I'm delighted that we have with us Alexia Latortu, who, along with her colleague, Jared Goodman, just completed a seminal paper on country platforms, and please check it out on our website. Alexia is former Assistant Secretary for Trade and Development at the U.S. Treasury and is now a distinguished non-resident fellow here at CGD. The paper benefits from a deep dive into platform experience so far, many interviews with key players, and Alexia's own direct involvement with platforms while she was Assistant Secretary. So we'll start with an overview by Alexia on the paper, its findings, and its recommendations. And I'm equally pleased that we will then hear from people whom I would describe as global thought and practice leaders in this realm, and who are undoubtedly shaping the next generation of platforms. And I will introduce them when we have our discussion. So we'll start with Alexia, and then we will move to our panel discussion, but please all be thinking of your questions because we will preserve time for the audience to participate in the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much, Nancy, and it's good to see everybody here, including Jared. I was looking for you, my co-author and proud new papa of little baby girl Mia. So he produced a paper and a wonderful girl. So, I mean, I think it goes obviously without saying that we're in very turbulent and uncertain times, which sometimes leads to paralysis. But in this haze, country platforms seem to emerge as a bright spot. One tool in the development finance toolkit that perhaps really meets the moment. And so we're seeing a lot about country platforms in various governmental and intergovernmental processes, whether it's the Circle of Finance Ministers, the roadmap from Baku to Belém, and financing for development in Sevilla. And more importantly, we're seeing a lot of countries themselves look at establishing platforms or engaging in peer knowledge and exchange with other countries about their experience with platforms. And so, given this sort of renewed momentum on platforms, Jared Goodman and I thought it would be worth to focus on them, but very much through the light of performance and implementation, not just announcement, but implementation. And Nancy described that we did that through an interview process. And you'll see a little quote here from Bob Marley, one of my favorite singers, who says, if you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from. So I will take a second to remind everybody that platforms are not a new concept by any means. If you go back to the 1990s and the Comprehensive Development frameworks and the poverty reduction strategy papers, the SWAPs, there were lots of efforts that very much resemble platforms. And at the heart of some of these efforts was this idea of reducing donor fragmentation. I said you didn't want to talk about that, Nancy, but that was at the heart. But also importantly, moving from a project approach to a programmatic approach. And that was actually, at the time, quite profound. And also there was a recognition that it was not just about financial resources, but also about policy. And I think all of those elements remain quite relevant. So because we have this long history of country platforms, we hopefully have lessons that we can learn from and capitalize. And we thought before focusing on the success factors, which is of course what we want to focus on, we did think it was worth thinking a little bit about where maybe platforms don't deliver. And if we overload expectations on them, they may actually discredit the tool, which can be quite a powerful tool. And so just 3 thoughts that we wanted to share with you. And the first one is simply the idea that platforms can validate, they can back a country's ambition, but they really shouldn't try to buy a country's ambition. There were some ideas that you could sort of force ambition by having high political announcements, big numbers, and say, okay, for these big numbers, I want to see country X increase their ambition. But frankly, I think a lot of the experience suggests that if the ambition is not truly the country's, it will end up sort of backfiring and slowing down, as well as, I would say, creating a bit of a toxic relationship, frankly, where donors who want to get everything for their last, dollar or yen or euro sort of end up micromanaging, frankly, and then countries kind of saying, well, you want me to do more? Keep giving me more. The second sort of insight we wanted to share with you with Jared is that platforms do automatically create lots of coordination, but coordination does not equate collective action or division of labor. So if you come together but don't change your behavior, you might not get different results. You actually have to be willing to change your behavior so that the collective truly adds up to something better and new. And when that's not done, the feedback from governments is that we actually spend so much time coordinating, it can be a distraction from actually doing the work that is truly important. And we've also heard from some governments that sometimes the most important decisions, the most material ones, still get done in a bilateral setting, not in the big group setting. So the more the merrier, not necessarily always the case. And then the third insight is that platforms struggle to untangle host government politics. So what is that about? Again, the idea is sometimes if the president, the leader of a country, asserts a direction, everyone will fall behind them. having worked in bureaucracies before, bureaucracies, parliaments are very good at stalling progress if there is not true ownership. And so you can't get around the hard work of building political consensus. All right, so now let's get to the more fun part. What can they do, and what are the sort of common and complex decisions that have to be made in the context of platforms? So the first one is around delivering on country ownership and leadership. Everybody, I believe, agrees that platforms need to be country-owned and country-led. But what does that actually mean in practice? And what's a country? So there's the government, but even a government, it's not just the Ministry of Energy or the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Environment. It's also the regulators. It can be the parastatals, the state-owned enterprises. So it's really quite a complex ecosystem that needs to really feel the ownership of the ambition of the platform. And then a country is, of course, not just its government. It's private sector, so the financial institutions, but also the corporates, and it's very much civil society. So we see, for example, if a utility is not really brought into the platform, they are able to be gatekeepers in terms of making the investment decisions and the financial flows that are important, the tariffs. And if they're not on board, it can block progress. And we've seen if civil society is not on board in South Africa, for example, where people felt left behind, they called for Komati, the coal plant, to be reopened after it had been closed, creating some real challenges for the JETP there. So ownership is broad, but ownership by itself, in our view, can be rhetoric if there's not true capacity behind it. And capacity can mean simply having enough people to work on the issue. It can mean having the right set of skills, or as one interlocutor told us during an interview, it can also be about having the right attitude. Bureaucrats who see their roles as being problem solvers, not just sort of box tickers. So that piece is really important. And here we have just one recommendation, and it looks a little simple, but we think it's really important based on our interviews, which is that we, the donor community, needs to make available really flexible, longer-term funding to really help build that capacity in countries. So we've heard from countries we can get money for consultants, but we can't get predictable monies for ourselves, so that we can say we have people working on this platform for the next 3, 4, 5 years. I don't have to renegotiate contracts every 6 months. So I think, again, making a call for all grant funders here to put their money together to support this really important bit. The second success factor, in our view, is around sequencing appropriately. What do we mean here? Often, the ambitions of platforms mean, by definition, that they're long-term, difficult work to do, and that the big payout may not come immediately. But if a platform is going to be successful, it's going to have to navigate a series of sort of signals of progress and short-term wins while keeping sight of the long-term transformational goals. And if the announcement is made to great fanfare very early, but the hard work of building the internal political coalitions, the technical pathways, the policy priorities, and even, I would say, the project pipelines, if some of that work is not done ex ante, big fanfare, time, frustration, disappointment, it's not working before it even got off the ground. And so here, a couple of recommendations that we have. The first one is, because there's so much prep work to do up front, and every country, of course, is unique, but there's certain tools and methods and approaches that could be shared across countries. And so if we could have centers that develop these tools, ideally in close proximity to the actual countries and people that will need to use them, if we can train trainers locally to use them, that can sort of help accelerate the preparatory work for platforms. And then secondly, again, really making a case for readiness and project preparation funding, including from funds that exist already, like the multilateral climate funds, making that much more accessible. So I think I'm looking at the Green Climate Fund with Alain here. We heard from North Macedonia that the funding from the Climate Investment Fund, accelerating the coal transition funding, made a huge difference, the fact that they could access this early on for their readiness. All right, moving to the third area, which was a bit controversial as we share the paper with some reviewers, which is right-sizing the scope. So, you want to have, ambition in a platform, and you want to have a comprehensive goal that the country is driving towards. But you need to be able, again, to have wins, at different time horizons, and wins that are tangible to people. So most people, everyday people, they don't feel emissions reduction. They feel more affordable energy, or just more energy when there was no energy. And so really making sure that there are real economy benefits that roll out during the course of the platform is in our view, absolutely critical. And then that creates the space for more ambitious political settlements and more real ownership in the country. And of course, there will be winners and losers, and identifying those up front and planning how to deal with losers in the transition or temporary losers is really, really important. For example, looking at social safety nets. And so here we have two main recommendations. And the first one is to maybe think of a country platform as a series of investment packages. There can be a broad, comprehensive, bold ambition, but then break it up in ways that you can show success, and more success brings success and more funding to keep the momentum. So that seems really important. And then the second recommendation is quite controversial, because it might sound like I just said, try and narrow the scope of platforms, but we also make recommendations to consider regional platforms. Why? Not because I'm trying to make a complex system even more complex, but because some of the binding constraints in some cases actually cross jurisdictions. So you can think about supply chains and supporting infrastructure. And so if the logic is actually crosses jurisdictions, then maybe an answer that solves for that binding constraint can actually make sense. And that's particularly true, I think, for smaller economies, for sure. But I think even the Lobito corridor one might think of as a regional platform. And then the final area is around unlocking the full potential of capital, which is what people usually run to as the financial resources. And here the platforms, in our view, will not create resources that don't exist in the system. But the beauty of them is that if you can align different flows to back a government's plan, and then to use resources that have different risk tolerances in a smart way so that you're actually building a capital stack, then you're actually getting more if you're able to do that. So that's sort of the real promise here. And some of what we learned here is that it's really important to bring in these different financial flows with different risk tolerances very early on. It's important to bring the private sector in early in the design phase, not just when you want something from them, is part of our learning. So we have a lot of recommendations here. The first one, which we're starting to see countries do now, it's super exciting, including Brazil, is start with the local financial capabilities first. Don't just look outside first. What do I have in my own country? And the benefit of that is not just resources that are in local currency, but it's knowledge about the country, its origination capacity. So that's really powerful. Then I would say, build on the pooled structures that already exist. So I mentioned the Climate Investment Fund, accelerating the coal transition already. They're there. We saw from the JETP in Senegal, they used an existing trust fund at the African Development Bank. So use the existing resources that you can up front. Thirdly, and this is a message to donors, and they're so bad at this, ideally, to get that capital stack I was talking about, you'd actually have money in one pool. I'm ambitious, but not naive, not gonna happen. But maybe we can challenge donors to at least pool the most concessional resources together, the most scarce resources, the grants, because those are the ones that are the most catalytic. But if they're not pooled, you end up seeing grants, a little bit of grant here, a little bit of grant there, and you're actually not maximizing the power of that grant funding. So challenge the donors to at least on the most concessional money to try and create some pooled resources. And then, another thought, because again, even though donors are coming, they're aligning behind a plan, but they come with their own due diligence, their own reporting systems. And if there's a way to say, let's, across the same types of capital pools, have a lead arranger that would do the due diligence, do all that work, and then the others could come right behind them, that would actually reduce transaction costs for countries. So encouragement for that. And then my last point is, I talked about capital stack, we talk about blending at the project level, but sometimes you can get a bigger bang, not just by blending within a project, but across projects. So for example, if you fund a struggling utility 100% with public money, that could do more to unlock opportunities than a tiny project that's perfectly blended, right? So think about it across projects, not just within projects as well. Really excited to hear our panelists who have lived through implementation themselves, and we'll end with the following thought that one of our interviewees shared with us, which is high expectations of country platforms and what they can do in this difficult moment. But actually, aren't country platforms simply development done well? Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't know about you all, but I am completely inspired by that presentation. And yes, please, Yvonne, to explore this further. So let me start just by introducing our panelists. And I want to start with Rania Al-Mashat, who's Minister of Planning, Economic Development, and International Cooperation of Egypt. Ani Dasgupta, who's President and CEO of the World Resources Institute, and Ivan Oliveira, who's Deputy Secretary of Sustainable Finance in the Ministry of Finance of Brazil. So the people who have been in the trenches in country platforms. And perhaps, Ronnie, I can start with you and pick up on Alexia's point on right-sizing. So Egypt's platform sets priorities for 3 sectors. And so tell us take us behind the curtain a little bit. Tell us how Egypt made the decision to prioritize those 3 sectors. What were the internal consultations? How did they go? How was consensus built around those 3 sectors? Obviously there must have been sort of some people who wanted to do other things. When did you bring in external partners in those decisions, or did you bring in external partners? So how did you arrive at the priorities?
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations, Alexia, for the paper. A few points. First, countries have NDCs, and if a country takes its NDC seriously, this is translated into projects which actually help them achieve these NDCs. For countries that want to move forward with respect to concessional finance, the easiest is mitigation projects, so it's no-brainer. Energy comes, renewable energy, wind, batteries for storage if that's something that you need. And then for countries that have water as an issue, water security is very important. And for all countries, food security is important. So water and food and energy are mitigation and adaptation. Adaptation is very difficult. We'll hear, I guess, from WRI on that. But adaptation is difficult because it's not always profitable to spend money on in that space. Similarly for food, until you're able to really articulate very closely projects which have technology, which bring in maybe high quality crops for export. So it depends. So the way I would characterize what we've done, we started with a country climate strategy 2050. That strategy was earmarked to NDC fulfillment, translated into projects. Projects, were priorities for us. So out of the many projects in the 2050, we chose 9, which were of priority for Egypt. The point about partners, it all depends on country and the country's history and the country's credibility with the international community, and there's no one size fits all. In the case of Egypt, we've had years of engagement with IFIs and MDBs. Everyone has a comparative advantage in a certain sector, has been working with us over the years in strategies related to energy efficiency or policy-based lending related to moving forward on feed-in tariffs to open up the space for private sector, or you're working with another partner on water because you've done so much on water treatment plants, or your logical candidate when you talk about food is one of the UN institutions related to food. So every country, it depends, but for us, and when there's the arranger or the convener, in our case, we have a dedicated Ministry of International Cooperation that actually liaises with the outside world to ensure that the resources available to the country are used efficiently and in line with the national priorities, which are translated either into strategies or into projects and so forth. So for us, from the very start, on energy, we took EBRD, a big MDB that mobilizes private sector investments. For the water pillar, it was the African Development Bank, given our history with it, with the institution in many of the water projects that we do. And for food, it was IFAD, also given the small farmers and everything that we do there. It started in July 22 and inspired by what we heard in Glasgow when there was the JETP designed for South Africa. And it was announced in Glasgow that they got $8 billion to move to the just energy transition from coal to renewables. And we were going to host the next COP in 23 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So when we left Glasgow to go to Cairo, and then the biggest headline was 8 billion for South Africa. So Prime Minister and my colleagues in cabinet said, Rania, 8 billion in South Africa, how much are you going to get us? And I said, well, I need a list of projects to be able to go out there and see how we can get the concessional finance. So when I started, discussing a country platform, they said, well, you don't use coal, so you cannot be a JETP. You have to, you move from coal to renewables. And then I said, okay, I'll create my own platform. Yeah. And I wish Alexia had mentioned Egypt explicitly in her paper. But the Nexus of Water, Food, and Energy was completely country-owned, was the first platform after the JETPs, not depending on the G7 explicitly. But of course, all the institutions that work with us in the platform are funded and have the G7 very much present in all the boards and so forth. But it's not exactly a JETP as was designed initially. So I said, okay, we'll do our own. Egypt was hosting a COP in Africa. Adaptation is very important for Africa. So we wanted also to provide an example where mitigation is important, but adaptation is as important for so many countries. And we will get the financing to be able to push the needle on those projects and on that very important part of our development process. So that's where we were able to create our own platform. We had a declaration, Egypt, US, and Germany. And in that declaration, we put a debt swap, and we identified some concessional financing. And we said, okay, let's try and bring forward our NDC target to give motivation also to mobilize financing. Fast forward, this was launched July 22nd. Now we're October 25. On mitigation, we had the objective of 10 gigawatts. We've already secured close to 5 gigawatts, mobilized $5 billion to the private sector, many elements of blended, and also financing for the grid in order to deploy the renewables on it. And then for water and food, been able to mobilize a lot of grants in order to do the feasibility studies for the projects. Also, part of these were related to localization of some of the some of the inputs to the projects themselves. So it's a very, I think Nouafi it was mentioned in the closing the MDB statements at COP in Azerbaijan. It was featured at the Finance for Development statement as well. So it's for us, we're very proud of it. Also, it's very replicable, and we're providing technical assistance to other countries to design their country platforms as well. But a few things, it's commitment from the government. Nobody can come and tell you what to do because you want it to be sustainable. So if you start and then you don't have that political commitment, it will just fade away. The second is clarity. You have to be very clear with your projects. And third, you have to be very credible with the international community, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to mobilize different pockets and different tools and design some things domestically depending on your circumstances. And then there has to be a very important commitment to policy reform, because in many instances, either it's allocation of land for the wind, making something easier for customs for some of the imports. So it's a very lively, dynamic process, and there has to be a country ownership, and there has to be a national owner for the platform itself, because it requires management. It requires dealing with so many ministries. One project, you have so many stakeholders involved. There needs to be transparency across the different financiers. For example, we have one project. You would see like the logos, not enough pages for one project. So you'd have BII, EBRD, IFC, MIGA giving a guarantee, and then commercial banks coming in there. So it's been extremely successful in pushing the investment story for the country. But again, it all depends on credibility. And then finally, I always say that for countries to be successful in doing all of this, you need a dedicated ministry, which is, in our case, international cooperation, to be able to, be in the middle between everybody who's providing the financing, but also internally, because every MDB, every financier has their own governance, their own way of, we talk here in Washington about making it more streamlined, making it more consistent. To some extent it will happen, but never be identical. So you really need somebody to be able, teams to be able to, okay, this is how we're doing this, familiarizing both the private sector, but also the different partners by what the project is about, the importance of it, and so forth. So it hasn't been easy, but it's been very successful. We're very proud of it. And Nouafi in Arabic means fulfilling pledges. So when we were thinking about the logo and the name, Nexus of Water, Food, and Energy in English, and in Arabic it means fulfilling pledges, because COP27 was about from pledges to implementation. And I always say that we go from policy to practice. And for us, this was extremely important in having a flagship Egyptian platform that could be replicated.
Excellent. That's a really good overview. And, so...
I don't have anything else to add, so it's beyond an overview, but...
That's it.
No, I had to joke.
Extremely efficient.
Very good.
No, but it's pathbreaking in terms of the sectors you chose, also the financial instruments, the debt swaps, to sort of crowd those in as a way to... and it sounds as if you weren't necessarily trying to get all MDBs involved in individual projects. You had a division of labor so that you didn't have this constant coordination problem. So that's really interesting. And I want to pick up and I'm interested in hearing how Brazil addressed the same kinds of issues. But first, let me pick up on your point on technical assistance, because WRI is really placing a big bet on their knowledge and network hub for country platforms. So clearly, Ani, WRI sees this as a major mechanism with a lot of applicability across countries, and you're really investing in a public good that can help individual countries build the capacity. So Egypt doesn't have to go around the world and share all of its experience and its technical expertise. But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for. I think at WRI we think this is an incredibly interesting and important development. And Alexia, a lot of things I'm going to say is very aligned with what Alexia presented. That's not a surprise. What we're trying to do is there's a lot of interest in countries and country platforms, and which is a very good thing. I just want to point out, Alexia did too, these generation of country platforms are quite different from the ones 10, 15 years ago, which I was part of at the World Bank, which were driven by the bank saying you need to have a country platform. Exactly. This is very different. It starts with what Rana just said, and I think Ivan's going to say, it starts with a country's ambition to doing something. Exactly. And it's a method to finance that something. That ambition or the goal is the most important starting point, which all these countries have. So what we're trying to do is very straightforward and simple. Is there a platform, a hub we can create? We're calling it a knowledge hub to support this across countries, to support them at different stages of it, because Egypt is well ahead. We're working closely with Brazil. They're actually very structured in what they're doing ahead of, but not every country is like that. How to support countries, learn from them, from each other. What the best thing they've seen is countries learning from each other faster, curate what we are learning so that other countries can learn. Rana just said how you're supporting already other countries. There are only 50 countries in the world out of 200 that are considered rich. So 150 other countries need this, theoretically. So how do we actually create this knowledge for all countries? And finally, if you get it right, just you heard from Egypt, there is a possibility for countries to actually push for large-scale solutions, right? That's the outcome we're looking for. I just want to say the central part of this is starting with the strategy of a country. Without a country having a strategy, all this is just discussion. Exactly. Right? That's not. But the key thing that what we are learning that's different from this generation of country platform is, number one, inside the country, it has to be these kind of transitions. You talk about Kumati, for example, is a very different from previous planning. It's like a whole society. How does the businesses, the government, the civil society actually work together to the transition plan? So that's very different practice than traditionally. And the second is that it is clear from all the examples, and you'll hear from Ivan in a minute, that 4 kinds of capital has to mix together, which is public, private, and for each one of them, domestic and international. Mm-hmm. So domestic public capital, domestic private capital, domestic international capital, which is public capital, meaning grants and things, and domestic international private capital. These 4 capitals traditionally haven't mixed together. And that is what this is trying to do, what you just saw around as example. And they all have very different risk appetite. And as you heard from how do you stack those capital with different risk appetite is the holy grail of what we're trying to do. Definitely. But I just want to point out that capacity to do that is not abundantly available. And that is what people are trying to solve across, that capacity to do that. What we are learning, just want to say from early learning, from working with, so Brazil's going to announce in a finance day, I think, right, Ivan, you're going to talk about it, about the country platform. 10 countries plus, we hope, will announce their country platform, which is really exciting. What we're learning from working with these countries is a lot of the countries actually need support the initial setup before even it's set up. A lot of the countries we work with, we heard from the businesses, they've never had a discussion. You two are not one of them, I'm just pointing out. They never had a discussion with the government of the transition plan. Exactly. So this is new practice. Mm-hmm. So early practice. Second is actually the foundational work of Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning. This is what Ivan's government is ahead. I've told this to Ivan when we saw him a few months back, that in Brazil, the role the finance ministry is playing in climate planning is outlier. And that is what we need to see more of, how the integration that works. And finally, the scale of investment. there can be a lot of tiny investment, but actually to have some examples of large scale aggregation of scale is where it's going to drive, and I think all these countries are trying. I also want to point out this thing doesn't need to be called country platform.
Exactly.
Is there a better name?
I don't know. It can be called anything, but
Can I just say something there? It's the G20 that came up with the country platforms. This was several years ago. And the idea was to bring the public and the private together. So that's even before the transition came in this way. But they mentioned the platforms, but it never materialized in an institutional way.
And there's a history to it in the
Yes.
bank. What I'm saying is there is a
matter.
particular practice that we should all support.
Exactly.
We shouldn't care what's it called.
Exactly.
Sure.
Because the name has a lot of baggage to it. That's all I'm saying.
And well, baggage, and also I've noticed people's eyes tend to glaze over with the word platform. So yeah, hopefully this conversation will reverse some of that. Okay, so Yvonne, a lot has already been raised, and maybe you can talk about the particular design and concept for Brazil's platform. BNDES is plays the key role, but with the finance ministry. So if you could talk a little bit about how that decision was made, but also it seems to be project focused, and recalling from what Alexia said, there's this aspiration that platforms have this broader systemic impact. So how does Brazil think about that? And then anything you would like to say about what Brazil is going to announce about platforms in the run-up to Belém would be welcome.
Great to be with you. A pleasure to see so many familiar faces here. And let me start saying that we have just earlier today launched the report of the Circle of Finance Ministers. That's going to be a critical input for the roadmap from Baku to Belém. And country platforms is pretty much there as the third pillar of the agenda, together with domestic capacity. So you can check the website and of the COP30, you see the Circle report there. And you see that there's a lot of, the agenda that is really to go for implementation, for action. So and it really touches on many of the issues we've been pushing from Brazil, taking the G20, the BRICS, and COP30 presidencies in the last couple of years, on how to reform the system in a way we can really, drive action. Also, given the relevance of the country platforms, especially in our case, since the G20 task force on climate, when for the first time we had ministers of finance, environment, and foreign affairs together under the same umbrella, not under the finance track or the Sherpas track, so we brought the two tracks together of the G20. And there, we started to discuss a little bit further, well, how's the concept being applied? We had the great example of Egypt and some other countries that were flexing muscles out of the JETP model. Josué Tanaka was around, and he helped us a lot in the process of, framing there in the G20 what are the critical aspects, to think about a country platform. And then there we have country ownership, flexibility, and connectivity as critical pillars of what we consider a country platform that can quite easily be applied to the Egyptian case, where we see strong country ownership, country-led processes, where you see the flexibility that is needed to, because of domestic constraints or international constraints, you need to change, you need to build, bring new sectors in or take some sectors out and maybe new players to the scenario. But also as a center place for connectivity and bringing all the different capitals that are needed to really generate impact. So from the concept, and essentially, this is our story. As coming to this, reading this book, Animal Spirits from Schiller and Akerlof, like it was launched in 2009, how human psychology drives the economy. It's interesting to see that one of the elements of Animal Spirits that they bring to Nobel laureates, economists, is that we like stories. So let me go quite smoothly and fast with you here in our own story and how we got where we are today. So G20 concept, but in the meantime, domestically, since January 23, Brazil started a whole process of connecting economic and climate together. and the Ministry of Finance is taking the lead. So Minister Haddad is doing that, and the ecological transformation plan is pretty much the plan, the umbrella plan that brings the government together, and all the other plans, the energy transition, the new industry, the nature-based things around the Ministry of Environment, the climate plan, they're all under the ecological transformation plan, where we see real development, jobs creation connected to the agenda and the imperatives of climate. So from the plans, we started to see that, well, now we got to know where we want to go. Not only we have the ecological transformation plan, but we started to see the sectoral plans out. What are the challenges that we have in order to implement those plans? And maybe at a subsectoral level, that we really need maybe an instrument like a platform where the government would really say, let's push to finance those subsectors that are key to our strategy, to our plans, but they're really challenging, and especially when it comes to private sector mobilization. So when it's essentially something that the government is doing on its own, you don't need a platform. In our case, essentially our thought was, all right, there are some challenging subsectors here that are really in need of support and that are really critical for our plans. So how that instrument, and you can call it whatever, we're calling it Brazilian Investment Platform, can be of help in financing challenging projects that are critical for Brazil. So we started the process essentially April last year to October when we launched it here in DC with the Minister Haddad, Minister Marina Silva from Environment also here with us. And essentially what we saw was that we needed to bring a multi-sectoral platform to be relevant for Brazil. So it should not be just on energy. So we went from energy, we brought mobility and industry, we brought nature-based solutions and bioeconomy. So essentially we have 3 pillars of the platform, and quite different challenges, in fact, because one thing is to think about a 3.5 billion project in the northeast of Brazil in green hydrogen. Another thing is to think about a $100 million US project in the Amazon in nature-based solutions. But both projects, if you go to our website, you see that they are there inside the platform. So also, obviously, quite important, the coordination across ministries there too, with the leadership of the Minister of Finance, but also the Minister of Mines and Energy, the Minister of Environment and Trade and Industry with us. So we started to go to subsectors where the platform could be of help. Just to give you one example on energy, for example, we have onshore wind outside of the platform, but we have offshore wind inside the platform. Onshore wind essentially is financed by the market in Brazil right now, so no need for a special instrument for that. But offshore is challenging, so we brought it, again, well coordinated with the Minister of Mines and Energy, and well coordinated to the plans that we have on energy in Brazil. So we set, and I see Alan from the GCF here, a great partner in that endeavor, and great to see how the GCF is moving a lot faster now, and it's great to see how my father is changing things there. We had a very, but then we needed to finance a structure that should be permanent, that would assess the projects against the criteria and go for the deals and really, go for what is needed for that project. The projects are quite different. So for some projects you need equity, for others you need, off-takers. For some others you need to come back to the government and say, look, you need to change your regulations. Yep. For some others, I need a new transmission line so that I can secure energy and so on. So the Secretariat, I like to say, we have the Interministerial Committee, so the ministers are well represented there. We set the criteria to bring a project to the platform, but the Secretariat is the heart of the platform. And so that's why BNDES, our National Development Bank, has been so important, and GCF has been so important, because essentially we brought BNDES to the center with all the expertise on project assessment. With the GCF, we could use part of our readiness program to finance the Secretariat itself. So we have money to move ahead in the years to come with a permanent structure that's going to not only assess the projects and bring them in, but more importantly, go to the investors and take them out of the platform and show that it's really of use. So interesting to see how in this journey we also start to see somehow the changes that we've been together with our partners in the G20, we've been pushing for, how the funds are moving ahead, how the banks also in our case are connecting more strategically to what is relevant for Brazil. So just to quote one of the banks that are quite connected to the platform, IFC, that's doing a great job in Brazil. They did almost $20 billion last fiscal year in Brazil. They have, we've seen that, look, IFC, there are a couple of projects here that are really critical. So please do check them out and help us in structuring the financing for those. And so out of the 15 we have there, at least 5 IFCs really in and trying to push. So that's the kind of strategic agenda that we're having with the banks. We didn't have, as in the Egyptian case, parts of the platform dedicated to the banks, but we're saying to them, but obviously, especially to the private sector branches of the banks, because it's essentially private sector mobilization in projects. So all of them are private sector projects there. Look, this is the priority. So if there's something you need to do, you go there and you try to unlock the private sector that is needed to take the projects out of the platform and really generate impact. So this is the journey up to now. There's something interesting in the last interministerial committee last month. We have just approved to bring equity funds to the platform. So essentially, we said for many of the projects that we have, equity is of the essence. So how could we solve that? And then BNDES being part of the process was very important because essentially they are launching a call to build up at least 5 equity funds using part of BNDES money. In our country program with the GCF, we're using $250 million to build up, together with BNDES, an equity fund that should be scaled at least 8 times. That's what they tell us. Like, hopefully that should be that, to finance the projects of the platform. So using the push and the momentum, the political agenda around the platform, and that support from the public sector is very important. That's what we hear from the private sector. Because again, those are not, daily projects that you go to the supermarket and you buy. Those are really challenging ones. Technologically, we have biofuels there, we have hydrogen, we have nature agendas, and so on. And so we're bringing equity as part of the platform. The 3 equity funds that we have in our country program with the GCF, they should be connected straightforward to the platform, but also we're going to have a call for other equity funds that are in Brazil being created. If there are
with local finance.
Local finance, yeah. So not only are bringing international, but also local finance. And so we think by doing so, we're facilitating the investments and the financing of the projects themselves, but going beyond, because essentially the idea is that at least half of the money from the equity funds should be in the sectors that are in the platform. But obviously there are some very dedicated funds that should be just for the projects of the platform. So a great journey, very fast. In fact, we've been learning a lot. And again, I think there are some very critical players there, and I would really say that having BNDES with us has been of great help. And that's the kind of fine-tune, they get to know what are the needs for each of the projects. Then you start to see where you need to unlock things to really make it happen. So that's our journey. And just my last point, very important, Annie has touched on it, that is on the way to COP, we're going to have 2 important events from now to Belém. That is in São Paulo on the 3rd and the 4th of November, so the first week of November, just before the COP Leaders Summit. Minister Haddad will be there with with other ministers, connecting to the private sector, CEOs, also MDB presidents, funds, to reinforce some of the actions of the Circle of Finance Ministers report. And more than that, we'll be launching the fund with the GCF and BNDES, and have on the 4th in the morning a whole discussion on country platforms, so you're most welcome there, to see what are the new ideas that we have in this new wave of country platforms, where we can see Brazil, Egypt, and many others. And then from there, we go to the 15th of November in Belém, where there's a special moment where we would like to, or it's part, in fact, of a package of on-country platforms that we're bringing connected to the COP presidency's agenda for accelerating solutions. That is, together with the GCF, we should have a couple of countries, 9 countries, according to Alan. Hopefully it should be even more than that from now to next month, launching their country platforms in Belém. So the instrument has been of value not only for Brazil and Egypt. It seems that other countries are really keen to push ahead. It's great to see how institutions in the system like the GCF are ready to go, both with the readiness program, but also in the reprogramming agenda that we've been doing with the GCF. For example, in our case, all concessional money that Brazil has access to, that is essentially in the GCF and with the CIFs, is going to be channeled through the platform.
Yeah.
So that's essentially, if you need money, if you're a private sector investor and you think your blended finance is part of your solution, you need some low-cost money to bring down the costs, you need to go to the platform in order to get it. So, and then also connected to Annie's point, that is, we're reinforcing the coordination group on country platforms in supporting the launch of the South-South Knowledge Hub that we could, Minister, use as part of this engagement throughout the year, from this COP to the next one, really showcasing the successes, but also the hurdles that we have in our own platform. So really sharing our experiences between and among countries that do have platforms, but also in a way to inspire other countries that are keen to push ahead and build their own platforms that should be country-led according to the country needs, absolutely in their hands. But that's one specific, let's say, drop in the trillions that we need, but a very, I'd say, very concrete and very efficient way to see even how the system has started to change. And then we see, all the stakeholders really plugging together to help the countries deliver on that transitions. That's the way forward from now to Belém. Hope to see you in São Paulo, but also in Belém on the 15th.
It's really interesting. And you can see how platforms are having these broader impacts on governance in countries, on engagement with the private sector, and also, offering opportunities for sources of concessional funds, offering pipelines. Because the standard, I don't know what you'd call it, lament is, there just aren't pipelines for MDB and concessional finance. And so Brazil started knowing exactly what the pipeline is. And Rania, you said you went to the other ministers and said, if I want $9 billion, I'm going to need a pipeline. So I think that sort of bears out the broader implications of this. Let's save 5 minutes of time. Can we turn to the audience now to give you a chance? Maybe we'll take 3 questions. We're a little bit over, but I'd love to bring you all into the conversation. Sure.
Thanks so much. My name is Guido. I work for FMO, which is the Dutch Development Bank. Very interesting conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your insights. I was wondering if you could give maybe your top priority 1 or 3 tips for DFIs that are interested in collaborating and let's say FMO is focusing on the private sector only. What are the best ways for us to strategically align to these initiatives? Thanks so much.
And let's see if there are any more questions.
I think right next to him.
Hans-Peter.
And then in the back.
Thank you. Hans-Peter Lankes with ODI. A question, a very big initiative for Africa right now is Mission 300. Mm-hmm. And Mission 300 comes with a lot of financial promise. It comes with country compacts. So I think there are now 30 of those. There are going to be 40 something. And it comes sort of with a drive for organization. Yeah. It needs to organize itself. Now, many of these same countries are expected, or we're working with them to build these country platforms. There's going to be a sectoral intersection here. I can name a couple of governments that feel a bit overwhelmed by this, right? So how do they deal with all of this? Well, how do we combine initiatives, can the country platforms become a way of integrating various other, I'm thinking also of other initiatives like SP500, and so there isn't, there are sort of various large-scale initiatives that may be in the pipeline coming forward.
Yeah, and also, what's it called, AgriConnect, that was just this big agricultural initiative that was just announced by a number of MDBs. Okay, one last question. Yes, this gentleman right here.
Thank you. Isaac from the Development Bank of Rwanda. I wanted to ask, I think you mentioned that a platform, we don't even have to use the word a country platform. So I think you mentioned in Brazil, it's a secretariat within the BNDES, and Egypt, it's a ministerial kind of coordination. So what qualifies as a platform? Is it having an office? Is it a website? Is it, I think it's sometimes confusing, but I think sometimes we might have platforms and we don't even know that we have.
That's a great question.
Rwanda has a good example.
Okay, that looks. All right, who wants to start? Ani.
I just want to kind of pick up your question and make it general about DFIs in general. So we're in Washington for the World Bank meeting, so there's a lot of people with a lot of money here, right? And we just talked about countries, what countries need. I just want to say from the supply side of money, at least 3 things are very much emerging from our early work. We're actually working in Rwanda with the team. One is, and this is GCS should get a lot of credit for this, is need for long-term support for capacity.
Yeah.
You just heard from this, a stable, not just here is one for 6 months, but building an institution. You are actually building an institution. That secretariat that you're building, I hope we can learn from and replicate, but that's an institution that didn't exist before. So need for multiple year capacity, this I must say is actually dwindling. Capacity, because capacity building has become a bad word, and this requires capacity. As I mentioned, this is a new way of doing things. It requires capacity, and I want to give you credit. You were with us last month in New York, so I just think this practice, that's number one. The second is the more difficult one, is harmonization. This you have heard many times. Though we are talking about this, there is zero incentive in most organizations that finance not to do their own thing. For their staff. I don't mean in the presidents of organizing and go say, we need to harmonize. The people who are actually doing the transaction, they don't get rewarded for actually mixing things up.
That's true.
I can say this because I worked at one of these for many years. So we need to change that, right? Because otherwise they are rewarded for doing their thing. This is a much bigger problem than the capacity building problem. And the third thing is you have to be programmatic. Yeah. You have to have programmatic support if you're a financier, not I did this here, I did this here, I did this, that. This is just the early learning. I just do think that country platforms are fantastic. I mean, we're trying to figure out how a demand-driven version of finance, which is country platform, can work. But if we really want to have a supply-side agenda for financiers, I think there's a lot to learn from country platform to be better financiers for country platforms.
Yeah.
Just on the word country platform, I mean, it's become used and understood. When you say a country platform, it's understood. So I don't think we should change it. We say Egypt's country platform for the nexus water, food, and energy, or Brazil is investment platform. So it's understood that it's a platform that has either difficult projects that need financing or mobilizing different types of financing for the private sector. So that's whether it's on a website, you're doing that work, or through a secretariat, but just the concept itself has been used in international text from the UN and from the COP, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, just in terms of the word. The second point is yes, it depends on countries, but at the same time, and I think it's Hans-Peter, your question was the several initiatives that exist, and one key point. I mean, climate today, even though there's a COP coming up, sometimes it's useful. Sometimes the discussion around climate is not useful. But I think the key point is growth and jobs matter. Growth and jobs require these projects which Brazil needs. It's Brazil's objective to do green hydrogen. It's Brazil's objective to protect nature. It's Egypt's objective to save each and every drop of water. So whether it's related to an NDC or has a transition impact, at the end of the day, it's a developmental project. It's in one of the country's strategies. There is public investment around it, either the road that is going to take the investor there or the grid that needs some public investment. So it's in the budget somehow, even if it's going to be fully privately financed, but still the government has some sort of role. It put it on its agenda. So this is also another point. And why do I say this? It's because we've been here in Washington for almost 2 days now. The word SDG hasn't come up. Miraculously, right? So, but the word growth and jobs has come up a lot. So I think when we're talking about country platforms, these are mechanisms that governments put in order to push their investment agenda, which creates growth and creates jobs. So I think it's becoming broader than just the transition or the climate.
Absolutely.
And and that's the way that you also win a lot of the public support, because at the end of the day, people want jobs, they want to be skilled. If you're talking about green skills, fantastic. If you're talking about skills to localize industrialization of, I don't know, solar panels, fantastic, and so forth. So I just, so I like the word platforms because it's becoming now part of our understanding. The second point is it's not necessarily just related to climate, because climate and development come hand in hand, and we also, through different COPs, and Brazil is pushing that as well, it's a development story. And third, on capacity. Capacity is needed always, and it's needed everywhere. You know, there are many, our Dutch friend discussed how they come in. No, they you know, actually, you are also part of our country platform, by the way. You do provide technical support there. So it's important that the capacity is, and I don't know why, Anu, you said that it's not a good word now, but I think it's
not. I'm telling you that the overall investment capacity building has gone down in the world. Anyway, please.
The funding for it.
The funding for it.
The point is the funding.
Oh,
for
the
it.
funding. Okay, the funding for it. But you know, as more sovereign financing is dropping, because ODA is dropping, the alternative is providing more private investments and trying to see how more pockets can go to push that. So I think that the number of trust funds that exist, GCF, etc., capacity is important if we want to do long-term and stay in the game for long. Those would be my points.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give you, Alexia, the last word. Just to interject that I'm very glad to hear about the move into equity in this context by the concessional funds, as equity often is the thing that it's the sort of missing link that is, you know, preventing finance from flowing. But I think Hans-Peter's question about, you know, we've got a sort of top-down goal setting on Mission 300 and this Agri-Connect, but then we have this movement. Because really what we're talking about here is a movement at the country level to bring themselves together around a set of projects and programs that they want. Somehow we have to make these things come together. So it's a very interesting question.
Just on that, Mission 300 has a set of countries. All of them today doesn't have a country platform. But if they did, they should absolutely try to use that. Right? I mean, not create another coordination body for Mission 300, but that's not true for all the countries. So I hope that push we can provide from both sides.
I think by the end of the year, there will be at least a dozen African countries with a country platform that are also
Mission 300, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
The same goals.
yeah.
No, but there will be coordination. It doesn't have to have a goal, right?
Yeah.
That's what Ivan was saying. It can
Yeah.
work for a set of things, not just one sector.
Yeah.
At least in Brazil.
Yeah. Well, and in Egypt too. Yeah.
I mean, I do think the MDBs are struggling with this, this sort of challenge. They're held accountable at the institutional level for what are they achieving, and so M300, I think, came out of that. On the other hand, countries, I'm sure a lot of them want energy access, but then, they want other things as well. And so they want their public resources to be directed to where they prioritize.
That's just one quick point on capacity and the way we have used that in Brazil, in fact. Obviously, having BNDES with us was of great help, but something very, very small but very relevant to the process was that Bloomberg Philanthropies came and said, through GFANS, and said, all right, so you want to build that? All right, I'm going to hire 3 consultants here, very good guys. They're going to do whatever you need to. And so I had those 3 guys in a team, and they were 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing whatever was needed to put together the pieces and so on. So when we got to the GCF to say, look, we already have this thing created, but we need this structure here to be financed. That's very little money. I don't know, probably they spent like $100K US or something around that. But my team is very, very small, a very small team, very, very tough team, but anyway, very small. We couldn't really, dedicate, take 2 or 3 people to dedicate for that. Having those guys there, just doing that, and coming to us and connecting to BNDES and the other ministries and the process in 6 months, we could build a platform. And 1 year now, we have 15 projects, almost $23 billion US, and probably in December we should have the first project out, more than $2 billion. And so hopefully next year we should have a bunch of new projects out. But just to reinforce the value of support, that doesn't really need to be huge support, but that gets in the right time to the right institutions that are really keen to push and can have a very important impact. Right now, Bloomberg continues to be supporting the Secretariat. So we have 3 colleagues from Bain Company helping BNDES in the process there in the Secretariat too. But if you place that, I like to talk, if there's somebody from GFANS here, is that it was the best investment of GFANS ever, because essentially, I don't know, a bunch of thousands US, and they are in fact, they are in since the beginning, and they're helping us in framing, connecting to different investors and so on. But that's it. Sometimes what you need is just, some support in the right place.
Yeah, the multiplier of that few 100,000 is in the billions.
Billion.
Okay, Alexia, I want to give you the last word. That picks up on your readiness point that you made. But anyway.
No, absolutely. We heard.
Last word to you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you very much, Yvonne and Rania and Ani, because I think you said it, all. And this new generation of platforms are super exciting to me, and in some ways, they're a laboratory or a microcosm, truly, for how to do development in a different and better way. I mean, so. The name, what's the name? I mean, so I'm fine with platforms, but we, with Jared, at first we didn't even want to define platforms. We was like, that's not the point. It's like the underlying sort of principles and ways we work, but we didn't even want to define it because it doesn't really matter if it's really about what you've heard from these countries here. That's important. That clarity of purpose that you mentioned, Rania, and the plans that guide the country's own ambition, and then deriving from that the projects. I mean, that's what matters. And so I think it really is a microcosm. And so to a DFI or to any external partner, I would say, if you want to be a partner, it means you need to come and be a partner, which means starting by saying, where are you? Where are your projects? What's your timelines? What do you need from us? Not, here I am, and here is my timeline. And it does mean behaving differently. And it means more agility, I think, than is natural to, and I say us too, I worked in development institutions as well, so I'm not pointing fingers, but I do think it means showing up with the ability to work differently, to truly be responsive to what you're hearing from the countries. And I would support what Ani said. I mean, I think the small amounts of money can be the hardest amounts of money to raise. I think that's part of your point. It can, and we heard that repeatedly, in our interviews from countries, is it's harder to get that small but super catalytic, upfront, predictable, multi-year funding. And it's good that we have some existing sources of that kind of funding, and let's unleash it faster. And so got a lot. GCF rightfully got a lot of credit. The CIF, I think, deserves credit too, and there are a few others as well. But I think for me, this new generation of platforms are different and are super exciting. And I think the dynamism of the peer learning across different countries, we're expecting different contexts, but saying, hey, let's share with each other what we've learned, I think really is a bright spot in a hazy moment.
I hope you all, that this has been great, wonderful conversation. I hope you all will join me in thanking our panel.